that we are going to be recording all of these sessions today. So for those who weren't able to join us, we'll be sending those out once we've synthesized them all and made sure they flow nicely. One other thing before we move on to our next wonderful speaker, this is a fundraising event. So we are currently fundraising for our local chapter's general operating costs, and then a wonderful community resource known as the Whitebird Clinic here in Eugene. So if you haven't had the chance to check out our GoFundMe, it would mean the world to us if you did. But without further ado, let's get started with our next speaker. I'm going to introduce Dr. Lyn Turkstra, joining us from McMaster University. Dr. Turkstra is a speech-language pathologist by training, and her research focuses on links between cognitive function and social communication in individuals with acquired brain injury. She conducts experimental and translational research on communication in adolescents and adults, and collaborates on development of practice standards to translate research findings into improved clinical practice. Dr. Turkstra is an author of over 100 peer-reviewed publications, including evidence-based practice guidelines for intervention in acquired brain injury. And she's going to be speaking with us today on her research and understanding of executive function. So Dr. Turkstra, whenever you are ready, take it away.
Thank you so much, Maddie. I am so impressed that there are still people here on the Zoom call. It is such a long day to be on Zoom. So thank you all for sticking around. I told Daniel I did not mind being last because I'm talking about mental fatigue, and I feel like this is a good time to be talking about it. So thank you, Daniel, for inviting me. Daniel and I met when I was out in Eugene doing some training for CBERT, the Center for Brain Injury Research and Training. And in fact, at this moment, probably the best credibility I have is that I'm working with McKay Solberg on the next edition of our cognitive rehab book. And so since McKay's in Eugene, I kind of feel like I've been in Eugene all week. And so it's fun to be joining you virtually from Canada today. Looks like I won't be joining you other than virtually for a while. So our border is still closed. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. Maddie, can you see it?
It looks good, Dr. Turkstra. Thank you.
Okay, whoops, sorry about that. I didn't mean to get out of that view. Okay. So Daniel asked me if I would talk about executive functions. Oh, it's a funny time of day here. The lighting's been perfect, and now you might see me moving around a little bit to get out of the spotlight out of my window. Okay. Yeah, I do. Probably look like I'm being interrogated more than glowing, but thank you. Okay, so the first thing I would like you to do is please take a moment and rate your mental energy on a scale from 1 to 10. So 1 being, I literally can barely think, keep my eyes open at this point, and 10 being, bring it. I'm ready for anything. Bring me animal models of olfactory function. I can do it all today. So I'd like you to just take a moment and do that.
You mean what it is right now?
Yeah, what it is right now. And you can put it, if you want, you can put it in the chat. I love seeing it in the chat. This is great.
Yeah.
Middle of the road. It's like people are 4s and 5s. Randy's a 3-4, so great. Very wise to have a little power nap in the middle of a day like this. So I'm going to ask you to do this a few times, because what I want to focus on for talking today, oh yeah, every day, that's great. Today I'd like to focus on talking about mental control and what parts of the brain we use to control our thinking and to solve problems and to do hard mental work, and some things that you can do to maximize that. Okay, so this is the only slide I have that looks like a busy science slide. So there's a person who's been a pioneer in talking about executive function, and I'll talk about what that is in a minute, but this kind of thinking. And her name's Adele Diamond. She's been working in this area for decades. She's from British Columbia, so I'm a bit biased because she's Canadian. But, and she's a person who studies executive function. She started studying it in rats and has studied it in children and adults. So she published this really wonderful paper talking about how executive function is important for every aspect of our life. And she cited all these studies showing that people who have executive function challenges may have these different diagnoses. So, for example, executive function challenges, we talk about them in brain injury, but they're also impaired in people with addictions. Self-control is a challenge for people with addictions. ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is defined as a disorder of executive function. Conduct disorder, which is something in children that in adults is called antisocial personality disorder, or someone's called a psychopath. Also in depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia. These are all disorders that are characterized where one of the main signs and symptoms is a problem with executive function. She also reviewed literature showing that better executive functions are associated with a lot of positive life outcomes, like a better quality of life, better performance for kids in school, better job success, marriage. A person, if anyone's in a long-term relationship with a partner, you know that if your partner maybe is not quite as organized or doesn't take as much initiative or is impulsive, that makes for more challenging times in a relationship. And then public safety. So there have been a lot of studies looking at how people who don't have very good self-control could make impulsive acts that put other people at risk. And so it's worth talking about executive functions. Oh, and I sent my handouts into Synapse. Sorry, Randy, did you have a question? Okay, there's Randy posted a great quote in the chat, which is, think about what you believe, but you don't have to believe everything you think. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. So what are executive functions? Here's the short answer. There is no single definition. There are about 22 definitions of executive functions. So these are the highest functions of your brain. And it's hard to define them. It's not like memory, where I saw earlier Daniel posted this great definition. Yeah.
Lyn, I got Dan Abasar on the phone. And can you send his internet went out? Can you send him a phone number so he can call into the session? Or Maddie or somebody?
Maddie, can you do that?
Yeah, so you said his internet cut out?
And I'm going to give you his phone number. Go ahead. What is it?
I have it. He doesn't have to share it over this recording. I have it. I can definitely do that for you. Please don't share his phone number. Thanks, Randy.
Share it with everybody.
Okay. All right, we'll see if we can get that started for him ASAP.
You have to text it to him. He doesn't have email.
I'll text it to him. I have his number. I will text him that. Thanks, Randy. All right, Dr.
Turkstra, go right ahead.
That's so funny. So there's no universal agreement on what constitutes executive functions. People don't agree. Yeah, it's okay, Randy. That was great. That was good problem solving by Daniel. So Daniel posted earlier a definition of learning. You know, everybody can agree on a definition of learning. Everybody can agree on a definition of focused attention, but people do not agree on the definition of executive function. So I'm going to pick one. And the conference that I met Daniel at, the Siebert conference, we did this exercise where we looked at a bunch of models, and I asked everybody in the room to pick one they liked, and this is the one they picked. So this is the one that I'm going to use. So this model by Adele Diamond, again, famous Canadian, just saying. Adele Diamond said executive functions, there are 3 core executive functions. One is working memory, which is what you have on your mind in the moment. So it's this mental workspace that you use to juggle things around and think ahead about what you have to do and what's going on right now. And if I say a really long sentence, you have to hold all those words in your mind to understand it. So that's working memory. So that's one component of executive functions. The second is control. So being able to control your thinking, your feelings, and your actions. So, and that is everything from like the fact that you're here when you could be having another nap, that is control. The fact that you stop yourself from saying things sometimes that should just be in your inside voice instead of your outside voice. That you can get unstuck when you're stuck on an idea or a feeling, that you can talk yourself out of it, or that can make yourself switch, that you can get up from the 10th episode of something on Netflix, which none of us is very good at doing at this point in the pandemic. So control was the second aspect of executive function. And the third is being flexible, being able to see things different ways. That I could, in fact, I'll use Randy as an example, that Randy can think of what Daniel needs. So can switch out of his, I'm in part of this conference, to switch to thinking, oh, I need to help Daniel and I can problem solve that. So that's being flexible. And what Diamond said was, all the other things that we call executive function come from these. So if I say I'm going to make a plan to achieve a goal, when I'm making the plan, I'm using my working memory to hold all the elements of the plan in my mind. I'm stopping myself from thinking of other things so I can focus on my plan. And I'm using flexibility because I'm thinking, well, how about if I try that way? That's not going to work. I'm going to try it another way. Again, Daniel's a great example. I lost my Wi-Fi, so I'm going to be flexible. I'm going to, instead of sitting here and just being really upset, I'm going to control myself and I'm going to be flexible and think I'll call in. So that's the three elements of executive function. So that's Diamond's definition. Hopefully that makes sense. And please do stop me anytime. Sorry, Randy, did you have a comment?
I'm wondering if when you talked about the control factor, does emotional intelligence equate to that, or is one part of the other, or how does that fit in?
So I think you probably shouldn't have asked me that question because that's my research area and it's something I could probably talk about for an hour. So I will use control and limit myself and say, usually when people talk about emotional intelligence, they're talking about your ability to read other people. And that's not this.
Interesting.
But you need this to do that. So you need to be able, so if I'm going to think of how you're feeling, I need to stop thinking about myself. So you need executive functions to use your social intelligence. So you need executive functions to use everything.
Say that last part again. Say that.
Yeah, you need your executive functions to use your social intelligence, or use your memory, or use your attention. The way I talk about it with teenagers is to say executive function is like the driver of the car. So you have an engine, you have tires, you have the car body, and that might be your social IQ, your emotional IQ, your memory ability, your attention ability, your math ability, your personality, all of those things. But to make them work, you need a driver. So I may have a great memory if I can only focus. But if I don't have the control to be able to focus, I can't remember. Or I may have a great personality, but I can't get myself out of the house so other people can see it. So executive function is in the old days, they called it, executive, the central executive, the thing that coordinates all the other functions of your brain.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm hoping I could tack on to that question And just
Yeah.
encourage that, and possibly in your talk, you'll include the comment that one of the other speakers made about executive function getting taxed when it's overcompensating for other areas that are not working so well. So you get nailed for, well, you don't have executive function when in fact it's working overtime.
Like
Thank you so much.
Nancy, is that what you're saying? Nancy, like a double-edged sword?
Could be called that. Yeah.
I think, sorry, Nancy, I think, Nancy, I'm going to talk about that exact thing. And your point, Nancy, is excellent. So when someone has a challenge doing something, it's very hard to sort out why. If you can't remember things and you have to use extra strategies and extra flexibility and extra control to do the same thing that another person could do who didn't have a memory problem, they wouldn't need all that extra executive function. Then it may look like you have an executive function problem, but it's not that. It's because you have to use executive function to do things that are automatic for other people. And so it's complicated, and in clinic, it's really complicated to sort out, like, why is this person having a challenge? Are they having a challenge because they really can't control their behavior? Or are they just running out of control because they have to use so much more than everyone else? So yes, and so we're going to talk about that very thing.
Kind of like running your car on empty, trying to get to the gas station, sort of.
Right, or just, yeah, that's right. That's exactly what it's like. It's like running a car on 3 tires.
Yeah.
Like you got to drive. It's harder to drive to stay straight.
A to point B, but yeah, that was
but it's going to take you more work. So a couple of things about these functions. First of all, this is age in months from about 5 years old to about 21. So executive functions get better with age through childhood. So they keep maturing until your 20s. And we know some people in their 20s who still don't have good executive function. We all have friends who have better or worse self-control or better or worse flexibility. There is no normal or typical executive function. It's the most variable function humans have. It's the most variable thinking. Like for memory, for habits and skills, what you have when you're born is pretty much what you have when you die. It's consistent all through your life. I mean, most children, unless they have a language disorder, will develop language in pretty similar trajectories. Executive function is so widely variable in the general population. And that's another big challenge when you talk about assessment. Because if you go in for testing, if you had let's say you had a brain injury and you go for testing, the person doesn't know where you were before the injury. So there are people who have incredible executive function, who are so controlled and so flexible and have this great memory and can compute things. And then they have something that's seems a pretty minor injury, but it has a huge effect on them because they had this amazing executive function. There are other people who maybe it wasn't a strength and maybe they have an injury and it's also devastating because they didn't have a lot to lose. So it's just very variable. So you don't get a test where it says the result, well, you could get a test where it says the result is below average, but it's not impaired. It's just below average because there's such a huge range in the population. And this may be partly because it develops for so long that it's affected by so many different things. It's affected by environment, it's affected by nutrition, it's affected by parenting, it's affected by sleep. So development of executive function is affected by so many things. It's kind of no surprise that everybody's really different in how they are at executive function. So it keeps developing. So they talked about people are adults when they're 18, then they're adults when they're 20 and 21, and now they're saying 25. That's all because this executive function, your ability to control your own behavior and thoughts, is still developing into your 20s. Has a big implication for brain injury as well, because sometimes people think, oh, that person was injured, at 21, their whole thinking is done, developing. but it's not done developing. Your brain is still changing all the time, your whole life, but especially into your late 20s. Now, for anyone here who's over 30, the sad news is the flip side of this, which is it basically goes down the tubes after 40. So it does really look like it goes like straight down the drain, but that's showing two standard deviations below the mean. So it does, we say, when we talk about executive function, we say last in, first out. So, for better or worse. And I said something to my mom once, which was really, really a thoughtless thing to say. My mom, when she was in her 70s, she would say, at this stage of life, I can say whatever I want. I don't really care what people think. I'm just going to say what I'm going to say. And I said, I know you can't help it because your executive function is not very good anymore and you can't control yourself. That was not very kind. So do not practice science on your family. That's all I'm saying. Now, at the same time, your self-control is perhaps getting a little bit worse and you're getting less flexible. Your knowledge is increasing. So you know more, you have more routines, you know more people, more environments, more rules. So that's how we end up functioning as well as we do, as long as we do.
Would
So
you
there's
call
all,
that wisdom?
pardon?
Would you call that wisdom?
That's right. It's wisdom.
Okay.
Wisdom that keeps increasing. So the big question is, where is this in your brain? People, this is Phineas Gage, famous dude in brain injury that people talk about, who blew this iron rod through his orbit. And the story of Phineas Gage led to a lot of papers and studies saying that executive functions are in the frontal lobes. So that's the part of the brain that's executive function. So if you have frontal lobe damage, you will have executive function problems. If you have executive function problems, it means you had frontal lobe damage. And you know what? It's not true. So it's not. To have good executive function, you need your whole brain. You really do. It's the hardest thing. It's the hardest thinking humans do. It's the most difficult kind of thinking. So you need all of this. This is a lateral, like a side view of the brain, and it's showing all the different tracks and connections in the whole brain. And all of that stuff needs to be working for you to have good working memory, good self-control, good flexibility. So people can have very mild injuries and have problems. People can have lack of sleep and have executive function problems. People can they can be hungry. Who said hangry? Earlier, one of the speaker who said hangry. All that stuff can affect your executive function. And so this is a quote in one of Adele Diamond's articles. I never let anyone with a cold do anything important. So in other words, because executive function is affected even if you have a cold. You know what? We have all been locked in our houses for a year. Actually, I can't speak for Oregon. I'll tell you, in Canada, we are in lockdown again this week for another month. People are drinking more. The domestic violence has increased. Teenagers are out there with no masks and no precautions. This is executive function fatigue. People are stressed, they're worried, they're upset, and it's very hard to be flexible and be controlled and be thoughtful and all of that when you just don't have it in you anymore. And so that I think is really important for assessment. I once saw a person being tested who had a muscle disorder and hadn't been able to eat for 3 days, and she was having neuropsych testing. And I thought, how can you test someone who's that hungry? Like, you just know, right? We all know the things that we can't do when we're really hungry. Oh, that's good. That's Daniel on the phone, hopefully. Is that you, Daniel, on the phone?
Yeah, hi. The little was cut out, but Nancy was talking to Dr. Patel, and then I've been scrambling, and then I got my wife to help me scramble. It seems like we had 2 Xfinity accounts, and one got cut out, and So anyway, I'm sorry I've missed a lot of what has happened.
There's no problem. You are just like a living example of good executive function, Daniel. It couldn't be, you even like reached out to your wife to help you. You couldn't have, it couldn't be
Well,
better.
she was asleep in the car with my son, so I didn't bother her first. But then when I didn't have the info I needed, then I checked if she was awake. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, but I have been listening for a bit, and I didn't want to interrupt.
She may not agree with that. I said you have great executive function. So
Thanks.
what does this mean for assessment? Well, as I said, for assessment, it's tricky because you may be having a good day or a bad day at the day you get tested. And also you may go in for a test and it doesn't capture how you are in your everyday life because you go in for the test, you had a good rest, you had breakfast, they gave you a computer or a pen and a paper in front of you, everything's set up, it's a quiet room, it has no distractions, you don't have a deadline. So you may not show the things that you feel in everyday life. On the other hand, in everyday life, you may have a lot of supports. It's a world you know, it's maybe a job you know, people you know, and that makes your executive function more successful. Then you go in for testing and you're doing this weird task where you have to sort cards according to the suits of the cards. It doesn't feel like it has anything to do with your everyday life, so you might look worse. So it's hard to do assessment. The fabulous thing about treatment means there's lots of things you can do to help your executive function because it can be negatively affected by a lot. It can also be positively affected by a lot, which is great. So, I put this in the handout so you have it. It basically says that neuropsychological tests are not very good at testing executive function. So I put the whole quote in there in case anybody wanted it.
Could you elaborate on the positive and negative things that influence?
You can do. That is coming right up, Randy.
Oh, okay.
So I want to talk specifically about control and what you can do for control, because it's one of the biggest challenges for a lot of people with brain injury and a lot of people with brain injury. So there's been a lot of research on willpower. Willpower is control, right? It's not eating that second piece of cake or making yourself eat vegetables. My husband had a couple of stents put in his heart in December, so now he's trying to eat the Mediterranean diet. And let me just tell you, he had them put in December. We are now almost May and he hasn't done it yet. So that is control. And so there's a whole research literature on dieting and quitting smoking and exercising that's really about executive function. They don't call it that, they call it self-control. So there's this whole literature called studies of self-regulation or self-control that they're really helpful, I found, to us working in brain injury. And so the basic idea of this is that your control is limited. It's like a jar of marbles. You have so many in a day, and the more you need to use them, the fewer you have. So, and I'll tell you, I'm mindful of time because I want to make sure that time, but this is a classic experiment. They had two groups of research subjects. They put them in a room, two different rooms. Both rooms, they had a buffet. The first group, they said, this buffet is for the next experiment, but you can eat however much you want. So go ahead, your experiment's going to start in half an hour, but you can eat anything you want on the buffet. The second group, they said, this buffet is for the next study and you can't eat any of it. Then they let them sit there for 30 minutes. So this group's eating whatever they want. This group's not allowed to eat. At the end, they said to both groups, oh, the next study is canceled. So you can eat anything you want from a buffet. So who do you think ate more overall? The people who got to eat whatever they wanted, or the people who weren't allowed to eat until 30 minutes was up and then could eat whatever they wanted? Yes, it's the second group. It's the people who are deprived. So because they used up all their self-control. And this, you hear that there's so many things like it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle change, or people say falling off the wagon, or basically it's running out of control. In my lab, and I've said this, Daniel probably heard me say this.
Yeah.
I call this the happy hour phenomenon, because I think the reason there's happy hour is because people are done controlling themselves at work all day. So all day they're on, all day they're on their best behavior. They're really minding what they're doing. And then by the end of the day, they just can't do it anymore. They can't do that. And, you know, there's a lot of us who saw people for, like, as a speech pathologist, I would see people for therapy after school, if they were kids, or after work. And a lot of people are just done. And I've heard so many people with brain injury say, I hit the mental wall. I can't think anymore. I just like, I feel like fog. You know, I feel like I can't do it. I can't think anymore. And so that's self-regulation fatigue. Now, I was going to have you do an experiment, but I'm not going to, because as I've been listening this afternoon, I feel like you've all had an experiment where you had to use a lot of control already, so I'm not going to make it any worse. If you're interested in this literature on self-control, there's a book called The Marshmallow Test. The author, Walter Mischel, just passed away a couple of years ago, and he was back in so the book's been back in the news about 2 or 3 years ago. It was back in the news. If you look up the Marshmallow Test on YouTube, you can see super cute videos of little kids. The Marshmallow Test was a study they did in psychology decades ago, where they said to little kids, I'm going to give you one marshmallow, and if you don't eat it for a few minutes, I'll come back and give you another one. But if you eat it, you won't get another marshmallow. And they watched how long the kids could last before they ate the marshmallow. And as I said, it's adorable. There's kids, they're kind of walking past it, they're turning it over. I mean, they're really little kids. And they said this is self-control development, because they mapped like how many minutes kids could wait before they ate the marshmallow. And that kind of told you where they were in development. So that's the Marshmallow Test. And for a lot of people with brain injury, have said to me that they feel they're living in the Marshmallow Test, that they're having to work extra hard to control their thinking and control their memory and control their feelings and their behavior harder than other people. So, yeah.
Can I ask a question?
People that are also self-employed?
Sorry,
yeah. I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I always thought of it as there's not a lot of literature, or most of the stuff I saw. It led me to kind of like a desperate feeling, like like recovery is not an option, or it's going to be harder. You know, like if you know something is possible, then it becomes easier. So the holding or not eating the marshmallow becomes easier. Do you think about that at all, or how does that relate with that? Because if you have a clear goal that you know that you can attain versus not, I always found that was part of what made the executive function or the delayed gratification part so difficult. And I was just wondering what you think about that.
So do you mean that it's harder to maintain that control if you feel it's hopeless?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that would make sense for anybody, wouldn't it?
I think so. And I think, yeah.
And I think that's critical in rehab, because for those of us who are doing the rehab, you have to really think. In fact, you could basically have given this talk, because every question and comment has been what I have on like the next slide. So I have something just about that, about what makes a good target, like what makes a good goal. So
right.
Daniel, if you hold that and let me know if I come back to it.
Thanks.
Or if yeah. And Randy, were you gonna ask something or say something?
No, I'm sorry. Good.
Okay. So I call this self-regulation. I'm sorry, I have an abbreviation. Yeah, sorry about that, Nancy. SR is self-regulation. I took a slide out and I didn't, whoops. Oh, never mind. I didn't take a slide out. I just animated it and then forgot. Okay. self-regulation fatigue is the word that people use in weight loss and quitting smoking. That's the term they use, self-regulation fatigue. I'm calling it control fatigue or executive function fatigue. So it's a common problem in everybody, including people who have challenges in executive functions, maybe because of a brain injury or something else. And as I said, people say things like, I ran out of thinking energy. A lot of when I've, oh, that's great, Tom, thank you. So Tom Tatlock said brain brown for the fatigue and emotional isometrics. I'm gonna have to try that. Tom said he uses the word emotional isometrics for trying to control not saying something that he's not supposed to say. That's a really good expression. It's like I'm pushing really hard, but it's not going anywhere. So I need to like keep that word in my head. Brown out. Oh, okay, brown out. Brain brown out. That's a good one. Yes, and so also a vocational rehab counselor said to me once, oh, I always meet my clients at the end of the workday. And so when he said that, he realized they're not going to do their best thinking because it's the end of the day. So we shouldn't be having our conversations about problem solving when they've been at work for 7 hours, because maybe they're tired and they're stressed, or they're trying to multitask. So these are things people say that suggest they're sort of running out of that. If you think of that jar of marbles. So the thing is, sometimes, I showed you that picture of the brain and how all those connections need to be working. If someone has a brain injury, sometimes they have a smaller jar. I just realized it sounds like I'm saying people have lost their marbles, and I don't mean that at all. I mean that you might already have fewer resources, and then you have to think harder than everybody else. So it's more work for you than it is for everybody else. And I don't think people always appreciate that. So here's some good news. There's, again, been lots of research showing ways that you can refill the jar. This is very individual. Everybody, yes, sorry, Ben, you can't use your brain injury as an excuse. Everybody has a different something that repletes them. Everyone has a different mental break. Nancy, you said earlier about you said earlier about your cooler with apples, like your good for you things. So the thing that's been used most often in research studies is chocolate. So apparently chocolate helps a lot of people get their mental energy back. But there's a lot going on right now with mindfulness, meditation, yoga. I put a little ice cream cone in there because I love it. Does it for me. I like TCBY, frozen yogurt, or ice cream. But to Daniel's point, one of the things that has shown in some studies is that if you say positive things to yourself about what you've done, that can help replete or refill your executive function. So one strategy I tried with a young man I worked with was, could he take a break in the morning and just take a moment to think about how successful he'd been so far that day at work? Because that kind of a break, in the research at least, has been shown to help some people. So, but it is really important to know it's not the same for everybody. Some people take a walk, some people like to go shopping, some people bake. Like everyone has their own thing. So that's a challenge, is you can't say I'm going to have an executive function treatment and it's the same for everybody. It's going to be different. So like Laura here in the comments likes chocolate, Jenna likes chocolate chips. Everyone has their own thing, but it is possible that you can do that. Now, oops, I'm going to stop my rating you. How do you self-rate? I'm going to ask you at the end to self-rate your mental energy after this talk. So there is a lot of software out there for exercising executive functions. There's a lot of sort of lumosity kind of stuff. So I just wanted to take a minute to talk about, of that stuff, what kind of works. Do we shape what repletes us? That's such a good question, Ben. I gotta think about that.
That's
It's
what I'm-
almost,
is there
sorry?
how to even discover what it is that replenishes you.
I know. I think by the time you're an adult, a lot of people have an idea. But then I think if you have a brain injury, it might be something different. One of the things that drives me crazy in rehab is that they say people are getting a break when they put them back in their room for a little while. And you're like, that's not a break for everybody. It's actually probably a break for nobody. To be honest, sitting back in your rehab room is probably not necessarily a break. But so anyway, about exercise, mental exercises. So can you just say, I'm gonna use control, and then my control gets better? I mean, most people are using the most they can. So see, but you can do it. So you can use Lumosity or Brain HQ or something like that to help you with your working memory or help you with your self-control or your flexibility. But the problem is it usually doesn't transfer to something in your everyday life. So if you do it on a computer, it doesn't usually help you with, like having a conversation with your partner. So mostly if you want to practice, you kind of have to practice on the thing that you want to have control or flexibility on. It doesn't really work to do this stuff that people pay a lot of money for, which I really object to. So if you do want to practice having better control and you want to practice it on the real thing that you're going to use it on, more practice is better. So if you look at like all the studies Adele Diamond reviewed, she wrote a nice paper on how to help kids have better executive function. And basically she, kid like playing chess or playing sports or like all these things can help you with your decision-making and your flexibility. But you have to do it a lot. So Jenna, I wish I could take a screenshot of your comment. So Jenna posted this comment saying, I used Brain HQ and it exhausted me mentally and I didn't have the energy to handle the rest of my day. This makes me bananas that someone is working on a computer task that has nothing to do with the rest of your day, but it wears you out so much that it uses up your executive function resources you need for the stuff in your life that's really important. And as I said, I also get really irritated that it's expensive. And I think people are vulnerable. And anyway, that's another talk for another time. So when people did computer training or exercise or mindfulness, the more you practice, the better you get. So if you're going to do mindfulness, if you do it once a week for an hour, probably not going to work. So you have to kind of be committed to doing it. You need to practice a lot to be an expert, but we don't know how much. 2 hours a day, 5 minutes a day. I don't know. We don't know. We don't know how much is enough. We just know that if you do it once a week, that's not enough. And you can't do it so much that you can't do anything else. So nobody knows. Also, it kind of depends on how the training is presented. If it's boring and you don't like the person, you won't get benefit out of it. So it has to be something that you like and that is like fun and engaging for you. So that's for this mental exercise stuff to work. It has to be something you like to do. It also, this is from a guy named Vygotsky, very famous in the speech pathology world. He said about teaching kids, you have to set goals that are just within what they can do, but they have to push themselves. If it's too hard, they'll give up. And Daniel, this is Daniel's comment from before about how if you feel it's impossible, you're so discouraged you won't start it. So if you say, I'm going to set the goal that I am never going to swear ever out in public, ever again, you will be, like, you may have no problem with this. Let me just say me. I would be so defeated. I would never even try because that goal is impossible. But if I said to myself, in this presentation at Synapse, I will not swear, I think I could do it. I might feel that I had the mental energy to do it. So far, I think I'm not swearing, so I think we're good. So yes. And also, I know somebody earlier today mentioned this whole thing about use it or lose it, and that's true too. If you don't practice control, if you don't practice flexibility, you won't get more flexible, you might get less flexible. So if you're in a routine all the time, every day, again, COVID, If you're in the same, same routine every single day, it's going to get harder for you to be flexible. You know how people say, if you live alone for a long time, then it's really hard to live with somebody else. That's because you have your own way, control of the remote. And so if you don't have to share, then when someone's there and they want to share the remote, you don't want to share with them. You sort of lost your practice. I see Jenna posted this beautiful quote. The edge of comfort is where the most learning can take place. That is fantastic. Maybe when you save these recordings, you'll get the chat. You can see the chat too. That is really wonderful. So it can't be too far off the edge, right? It has to be right at the edge of what you can do. So it's good to challenge yourself, to challenge your flexibility and challenge your control and challenge your working memory, but in a way that's something you can do that's fun, maybe with other people, if that's what you like or not, if you don't, the animals, eating chocolate, whatever, that's all good. So a summary is, if you want to exercise your executive function, it's good, but you should probably do it on the tasks you're going to use it on. More is better, but only if it's the right person who's delivering it, or it's interesting, or you want to do it, and you're challenged, not too much, but just on the edge of comfort, and you keep using it, and you don't just let it kind of waste away because you haven't used it. So I'm actually gonna, not really. So a really good intervention for executive function is fun and novel and diverse, has lots of practice, is just challenging enough, but also recognizes that there's lots of things that affect your executive function. You need to have sleep, you need to have nutrition, you need to have some support. There's lots of things in your life that help your executive function, and they're not all you. There are also things around you that help you look amazing. So the take home from everything that I've talked about so far, and your comments as well, is that executive functions take a lot of the brain. It has to work in a really coordinated way. It changes every millisecond. You have to be like on it. Everything's changing. And so it's really hard to test. It's hard to capture those challenges. If I'm working with a student, I will give them homework. Like if they're having trouble getting their homework done because they don't have initiative and they can't organize it, I will ask them to do homework, because I can't test that in the room. I need them to go home and show me what it is they have a problem with. And if they come back the next session and they didn't do their homework, then I learned something. So it's hard to test, especially with a standardized kind of a neuropsychological test. It's affected by tons of factors, and you can help yourself by paying attention to those. Thinking like, do I have a lot going on right now? Is that why my decision making is not great? Am I tired? Am I eating okay? Am I trying to do too much? There's softwares, all kind of apps now for you to like monitor your own mental fatigue, things like that. So those are all things that can support you. So lots of ways to improve it in everyday life. Okay, so now we're at the end, at almost the end of your day. You just have a panel left. So I'm wondering if you could put in the chat where you are on a scale of 1 to 10. If 1 is, thanks for the 1. If 1 is, I can't do anything right now, and 10 is, you know what, I can take anything on. How are you feeling right now?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. What do you say you are now, Daniel?
I was at a 5 before everything crashed, and now I'm at like a 3. I just wanted to say, I was looking forward to your talk, and I'm sorry I missed parts of it, but it's so interesting. I always thought to myself, if I would have had like a full frontal injury as opposed to it's kind of like partly frontal and to the side, I thought I would have been absolutely screwed. And I guess learning about it, although executive function obviously takes more is involved, it's comforting to learn that it has the same general rules as these other capacities. And I also realize how important it is for the people around us to understand what we're dealing with, because I think that's where a lot of the support and the need, for getting help comes from, or at least that the like resiliency is a part of us, but if you have the other people around you helping, it's so much more important. Or at least it helps so much more. So I just wanted to say I'm glad to learn what you were saying, and I'm sorry I missed parts of it. Yeah, I'm at a solid 3. But anyway.
Excellent, Lynn. I thought your whole presentation was nothing short of excellent. It really hit home for me. In many ways, validated much of my experience. So, keep going.
Thank you, Randy. I'm very, I'm very appreciative of the ways that people I've worked with have talked about this over the years. It's been, a huge help for me. So I was really grateful to have the chance to talk to the Synapse group. Grateful for Daniel's invitation. It was really awesome. So I'm just looking at the comment from Tom. Tom does it. So Tom has, Daniel, I'll tell you because you're on the phone. Tom has records he calls them challenges, but says they're his failures. And then he started to record successes. And I think that's the thing. Like it's difficult to sometimes figure out what you're doing that's right, but it's nice to pay attention to it. I think that's great, Tom, that you started writing down the things you were doing successfully, and then you can figure, so that's what I need to do. I know I'm at my best. I worked with a young woman once who was interviewing for a job, and she identified the 3 circumstances under which she was a great employee. So she said, I will be an excellent employee if I have some people around, but not too many. If you give me a few days to learn my job task, and it's okay if I ask questions. And that was her, like, this is how I'm excellent. And I feel like that's what we should be thinking. You know what I mean? Like certainly this is what our challenges are, but these are the circumstances under which I'm excellent. And sometimes it's not about me, it's about the other person. When we have students with brain injury going back to class, I used to say, it's all about the instructor, not the student. And I think Lori could probably echo this, Elhart's there now that she has her camera on, that if a college student with a brain injury can have more success if the instructor is organized. If they have handouts, if they have deadlines, if they explain things, I almost don't care the topic. Like if you have a fantastic instructor, that person could have success, and sometimes that's what's important.
I would love to comment on that, Lynn, because I think it's the ability to advocate for yourself, to have the awareness of how your mental control is at any given moment, and then to have the confidence to say, this is what I need, is huge. And that's an aspect of it, right? If you put this all in the context of the environmental component of the World Health Model, it's a huge piece. And I'd be interested in some thoughts about that, is how do you build up the self-advocacy to advocate for what you need, to pull in others to help you with the executive function piece in a more communal or community-based approach, rather it's all on my shoulders to get this figured out. Does that make sense? The point I'm trying to make? Because I think you've already hit on that a lot. And I think there's probably others that might want to comment on that. I feel it's like a huge piece to contemplate. I might know what I might need, but I just feel so embarrassed to ask for it.
Well, or also,
I think it makes huge sense.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I literally didn't talk to anyone about my brain injury for over a decade. And like when I met my wife, I think I mentioned it, but it wasn't until about 17 years after my injury where I decided what I was doing wasn't the right way, keeping it to myself. And I guess being ashamed of what I couldn't do. I'm still in that shift, and I'm trying to talk to people. I'm trying to put this all out there. But yeah, there was something in me that, for especially the decade when I was doing the recovery, I was so embarrassed and so ashamed of it. And I think I learned I made every single mistake, and often no one noticed, but when they did notice, it get angry at me. But I would make the mistake and then learn from it, and then I'm still doing that in my life, but I would not make the mistake again. And so it became this weird balance of having to explain to people in my life, look, this is how I am, and I'm gonna make a lot more mistakes than other people, but I'm good at not making them twice, and I learn from it. I also think I learn in a completely different arc than most people that I've ever met. But once I learn it, it's there. So it's just a weird process. But yeah, I'm hoping that through talking to people and getting things out there, I've now spoken to a few people who are in the first years of their brain injury, and then it's like having someone to talk to and making it more normal, it becomes more accepted. And it's sad because they also have the same problems that I had, where their family doesn't really understand what they're going through. But hopefully if we talk about this enough and get it out there in different ways, it'll become more accepted, or at least they won't have that need to hide it and share with people and get the resources that they need. Because I agree, it's a huge, it's a necessary thing to go through this. It's hard without it.
But there's one thing I want to say, just apropos of Lori's comment. The thing is, it's hard for all of us to know our strengths and limitations, right? I mean, it's hard for everybody. And I think it's really almost unfair to expect, like, if a person has a brain injury, you spent years of your life learning to get to know yourself, and then you have a different self. Like, I mean, a lot of you use the same self, but your thinking might be different. Yes. So I think it's a lot to expect a person with a brain injury to figure all that out and what that means, like after some short period of time. So like, people talk about lack of awareness, and I always think, like, awareness, I barely know what I'm good at. And I've had pretty much the same brain, although again, last in, first out for decades. And so I'm like, how could you think that a person who wakes up one day and is thinking differently, how could you expect that person is going to have this accurate sense of their own strengths and challenges, like within a month or 6 months or 5 years? And so Lori, I think a big part of it is that it's too much for a lot of people, like, to expect the person who has the brain injury to be the one who carries the load. I know that's the way it is. I thought it might be different here because in Canada we have a single payer. So we have a lot more continuity of care. Like, I've been in the US most of my life. And so it was like, oh, you don't have the same 2 people providing services through the whole continuum of brain injury recovery. So it makes it really hard to get a team who works with you, because that team is changing like every couple of weeks. So I thought, here, we have a single payer. It doesn't matter. Even one payer, you're still moving around. And so it's, I still think it's really tough for you to have a team that you can call on when it's not the first month after the injury, when it's 2 years later and you need some support going back to school, or your job changed, or your housing changed, or 5 years later, or 10 years later. I feel like we just don't really have that.
You're talking about
and
for TBI incidents. That's sort of what you just described, Lynn.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. It is. Sorry, I'm looking at the clock. It's my time. It's almost 7 o'clock. It's 59.
I didn't want to interrupt. We are technically coming up to our assigned, or our goal time for our panel to start. But if anyone has no, absolutely. This has been really, really wonderful. I wanted to give you my own final thank you for being just a fantastic speaker. It was wonderful to listen to you. It was interesting and entertaining. So that was wonderful. If anyone has a final thought or a final question, we have like another minute, but I just, if we could wrap it up, it's probably about that time.
Lynn, where are you, Lynn?
I am at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. So about 35 minutes from Toronto.
Oh, okay.
Actually, where I am, Randy, is in my house because we're in lockdown.
No,
sorry, I'm kidding you.
I thought you were in Canada. I wasn't sure, and I was just wondering where. That's all.
That's yes, and I am going to sign off because it's 7 p.m. our time.
Yes,
and
thank you for being here all day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's
Did you
been
say
great.
you're writing a book?
Yes, McKay Solberg, your local McKay Moore Solberg from Eugene, Oregon.
Oh, you're
McKay and
the
I,
one who co-authored the book with McKay a long time ago. Oh, good to meet you. I didn't realize that you were talking all this time.
that's who
Sorry.
I am. So McKay and I are hard at work on our second edition.
What's it about? Same book?
It's a cognitive rehab. It's the same cognitive rehab book, but this time we have more stuff in about, about like psychological factors like mindfulness and things like that. So, but yes, so yeah, we're working on the book right now. So I get to see, it's fun. I get to see McKay, which is always wonderful. So yeah, keep a lookout in 2022. Oh, it's called, Jenna, it's called Optimizing Cognitive Rehabilitation. Here, I'll put it in the chat. But don't buy it because there's going to be a new one.
Thank you, Lyn.
It's
Thank you.
nice.
Pretty good.
Thank you so much, Dr. Turkstra. Thank you for staying and giving such a wonderful talk.
Thanks, everybody.
Great.
It was good to
Really
virtually
glad
meet you all.
Thank you, Lyn.